Human history shows us the symbiotic relationship between man and earth has been complex. According to early historian Charles Hudson, man recognized he had to exploit nature in order to live. But man should do so carefully. Nature is not infinitely forgiving. Ancient Chickasaws had a spiritual connection to the land and its bounty, while keeping an eye toward the future.
Chickasaws had a unique relationship with the natural environment here in the homeland.
I think the relationship between my ancestors and the Creator was a very strong relationship because they were able to go out and gather everything that they needed to live day to day.
This cultural ecology, or interaction of human culture with natural ecology, stretches back for centuries and millennia here in the homeland.
The archaeological record, as well as knowledge passed from generation to generation, shows early Chickasaws were resourceful and innovative, utilizing plants and trees in unique ways that were efficient and practical for food, shelter, and a host of utilitarian uses.
The Chickasaw people were and still are amazing people. They could take whatever was in their environment and use it for their resources. Their homes were built out of the trees around them, and their ability to build tools out of whatever was around them was just amazing.
Ethnobotany, or the study of how people of a particular culture and region make use of indigenous plants, continues to inspire Chickasaw people today. Many who want to know more about how their ancestors were able to thrive in an ever-changing environment. Chickasaw ethnobotanist Stephen Bond is one of those people.
It would have been dominantly swampland. Getting around, getting about would have been difficult, and for them to have made such an advanced civilization possible in that area would have taken some pretty advanced science and ingenuity.
Utilizing the natural world in an efficient and innovative way was important for survival and longevity. One example of how early Chickasaws mastered this approach was the use of river cane.
Arundinaria cane is a plant that was of extreme importance in Chickasaw daily life.
So we're looking at a stand of river cane. It can be very narrow in diameter, but we've got some older specimens that have a bigger diameter here at the base, and it can grow upwards to 18 feet, but it's certainly not uncommon to find it 12 feet in height. Large thickets would have been miles wide and 10 miles long.
They had large river cane breaks all over the Mississippi area, just tons of river cane. So of course, that would have been something that they would have used every single day because it was so available to them.
River cane was very plentiful there, and it was used for various ways of life.
And they made so many things out of it. Their tools were made from river cane. Their instruments were made from river cane.
If it is cut a certain way and burned some, it can become very, very strong and very sharp.
Split cane can give you a paper cut to the bone. It is a traditional form of knife before the advent of metal knives, and it augmented chipped stone tools, which were better for strong cutting edges. Cane also served as the spears, the throwing spears of ancient Chickasaw hunters prior to the bow and arrow advent. Long cane spears with a stone point fixed into the end were the primary missile weapon for hunting and warfare. Cane was also used in the manufacture of blowguns, a traditional weapon that Chickasaw children were trained in.
River cane was used for everything.
When we find a Chickasaw house site, It is often marked by a pile of burned clay daub or plaster brick-like rubble that is the remains of a Chickasaw winter house that was covered in clay and then burned. And inside and on the side of these clay daub briquettes, the impressions of the split cane are preserved. And you can see how Chickasaws would weave it together to make a lath in between the posts of their houses and over the rafters of their houses. And then that was the lath on which the clay plaster was applied. They split it and used it for a basketry and matting for flooring, wall covering. Basketry was of critical importance.
The exquisite southeastern baskets, they're double-lined, they're very advanced. They were tight enough to carry water.
Cane even provided a food source.
Large breaks of it all go to seed, and that seed was harvested and ground into flour. It was nutritious and boiled as a porridge.
River cane was such an intrinsic part of Chickasaw life and culture. It was still considered vital, leading up to negotiations for the forced removal of the Chickasaw people from their homeland.
The lack of cane was one of the big obstacles. When Levi Colbert and other Chickasaws were scouting the present-day southeast and south central Oklahoma area for a new homeland, they noted the lack of cane in many of the rivers and creeks was going to be a problem because they had the largest herds of horses and cows of any tribe, and they relied on cane breaks, which were so extensive here in the homelands as the winter forage and fodder for their livestock. So this lack of cane was a documented problem.
Throughout the North American Southeast, additional important species of plants provided strength and power for the Chickasaw people in hunting and battle, and continued to be valued by today's hunters and craftsmen.
Bodark, or Osage Orange, scientific name Maclura pomifera, is a tree species that is native or indigenous to the Blackland Prairie here. Bodark was important in Chickasaw culture because of its wood. Its yellow wood is extremely strong and has high tensile strength, and it has a springy aspect that makes it the best wood for bow manufacture. When Hernando de Soto was here in 1540 and 41 and had the misfortune to have a battle with the Chickasaws, the next morning after the Battle of Chickasaw, he had his king's factor go out and survey the battlefield and record the damage. And so the Spanish marveled at the power of these Chickasaw bows. Bodark wood is so dense that it doesn't even float. Also, it will spark a chainsaw to this day, even though there's no fence or metal in it. There were traders that traversed the southeast in trading these Bodark bow staves or blanks for making bows. And in fact, a mound site in Louisiana preserved a cache of Bodark bow staves from about 1100 AD that were buried in the ground that a mound later covered and preserved. Chickasaw artisans to this day prefer Bodark for making bows because it is so tight-grained and dense.
Ingenious Chickasaws and other southeastern Indian tribes who traversed the rivers in the region used a unique method to turn trees into vehicles for modes of transportation.
The large dugout canoes probably would have been made from the tulip poplar,
or more commonly cypress logs that had either fallen and were found in rivers or were cut and burned down for this purpose.
These trees would have grown in the riparian area, and they would have been massive.
The method of creating a dugout canoe was unique. It involved the use of fire. Burning out the center of the log was easier than chipping out all that wood. And as these coals would smolder and carbonize the wood, the charcoal essentially would be chipped out with shell or stone adzes and hatchets. And over a period of days, the log could be thinned and hollowed down to the sleek and lightweight design of a dugout canoe, as thin as half an inch, creating a very lightweight and versatile watercraft that could be piloted or poled by one individual, or there are some accounts from the Hernando de Soto expedition of war canoes holding as many as 100 warriors. This is quite believable, though, given the prodigious size of some of the cypress trees that still exist in the Mississippi Valley.
The Chickasaw diet has evolved through the years. Discoveries about the species and interesting uses of indigenous plants provide glimpses into the relationship between the people, their food, and their culture.
Chickasaw ancestors harvested a myriad of wild plant foods and resources. Hickory nuts actually provide the highest caloric content per weight, and the Chickasaws had a unique method for processing them. They would crack the hickory nuts and then boil them or simmer them in clay pots for hours until the oil was extracted from the nut meat and rose to the surface. And this could be skimmed off and would congeal like lard and was known as hickory milk. And this hickory nut oil would preserve, and it was used to flavor corn soups, and also cornbread was dipped in this, and it was a fantastic condiment that I've heard tasted a little bit like black walnut ice cream. Actually, sunflower is probably the most widely distributed species today that was actually domesticated right here in eastern North America by Native American ancestors.
But perhaps the biggest impact and most significant crop to influence Chickasaw culture was not native to their homeland. It came from other regions in North America.
Corn, which is of global importance today, was domesticated over thousands of years in Mexico by hunter-gatherers, and this is documented in cave sites in the Valley of Mexico, where stratified deposits in rock shelters and caves showed the evolution. Archaeological evidence shows that corn and beans came to be produced here in the homeland around 1100 AD.
During the Mississippian period, that's when corn was the biggest.
It came with a whole belief system that involved the sun and its life-giving generative powers. So it was indeed part of a spiritual belief system.
While the cultivation of corn eventually ushered in changes in diet and lifestyle, Chickasaws continued to harvest wild fruits, nuts, and vegetables, and to hunt.
It's easy to think that once the first corn and beans seeds were received, that all of a sudden people settled down and became farmers growing fields of this. But archaeology shows that's not the case. People resisted settling down into one spot and relying on a single crop, which has its risks. Ancestors valued their mobility, their way of life, in which people moved their settlements to the locations of wild foods resources on a seasonal basis, was a deeply traditional hunting and gathering way of life. So there was a resistance to the adoption of farming.
However, as time went on, agriculture became more and more important for food security and for trade.
We grew a lot of corn in the spring and the summer. The abundance of corn we had, we would take and trade it for other things. And we would also put that corn away for the winter to make sure that we had enough to eat.
And we began planting our three sister gardens, corn, beans, and squash, which were a companion planting.
And the purpose of that was that the corn was the base for the whole mound. We would plant the corn first, and then once the corn came up to about 6 inches, then we would plant a vining bean. And the bean, once it grew up 3 to 4 inches, it would crawl around the corn.
And we did this on purpose because we knew that each one of these plants would help each other. The corn would serve as a stock for the beans. The beans would release the nitrogen in the soil for the corn.
And then we would plant the squash. And the squash would be along the ground, and it would keep the soil temperature down, and it would also keep weeds out.
So we knew this was a good system, and we grew the Three Sister Gardens, and still do today, because it works so well together.
In the 18th century, Chickasaws began to adapt their agricultural practices to meet the needs of European travelers that increasingly traversed the Chickasaw Nation on the Natchez Trace, returning to their homes in Tennessee, Kentucky, and points north and east of here. These travelers were hungry, and Chickasaws saw a business opportunity, which was to move their residents to the road, the Natchez Trace, and to produce a surplus of corn, beans, sweet potatoes, and then sold it to travelers, including the U.S. Army during the War of 1812 when Andrew Jackson was marching his men back and forth, and they were often starving. So this industry, if you will, the stands or inns that developed out of Chickasaw households along the Natchez Trace were an example that was soon followed by other Chickasaw families. Chickasaw people knew how to use almost every plant species and tree species in their environment. That knowledge was learned and passed down through active practices, and it provided a relationship with the land. That is part of what made the land sacred, because it provided for every aspect, every need that Chickasaws had for food, medicine, emplacement, spiritual balance. So the removal from this homeland was much more to the Chickasaw people than just a relocation of your home site. It represented uprooting of the tribal tree, if you will.
Levi Colbert said the Chickasaw Nation was like an old tree that could not survive relocation to Indian territory. One cannot transplant an aged tree. It will not live.
So it is really a testament to Chickasaw tenacity and adaptability that they were able to survive and eventually thrive in Indian territory, a natural environment that was so different from the homeland here.
I think about my ancestors a lot. I think about how it must have been for my great-grandmother and her mother before her. They made every tool that they used out of the flint that they found on the ground or the bones from the animals that they killed to eat. And to be able to take something out of nature and build it into something that they could actually survive on is amazing to me. And they did this thousands of years ago.
When I'm in a pinch or down or think things are too hard, I think back to what the ancestors had to go through and how they essentially, turned sticks and stones into a thriving civilization.
If you don't know where you're from, you're missing out a lot on your life. God provided everything that we needed to survive, and He's the same yesterday, today, and forever, and that He's still here. And our ancestors gave a lot in our survival, and we shouldn't ignore it.
To lose everything that they had and still be such a strong people, and to come back so strong, that is definitely a testament to what kind of people the Chickasaw people are.
And that knowledge of the ancestral relationship with the earth reaches across the years to inspire Chickasaws, connecting them to their past, their heritage, and the people who came before them.
I think about my ancestors every time I'm working in my garden and producing my food. I want to be like my ancestors, and I want to make them proud.
Sharing what is known about ancient Chickasaw culture and its relationship to the natural world binds an enduring culture to today's Chickasaw people. And it will continue with future generations, with every piece of river cane crafted as it was long ago. Every stave of Osage Orange carved and bent as it was done hundreds of years ago. The spirit of being Chickasaw continues to thrive.